Hi, my name is Shanez, and I wrote a book. I've always been an avid reader, and one of my favorite genres to read is historical fiction. I'm also passionate about history and learning more in-depth content from history, so I decided to combine the two things that I love into one, creating my own historical fiction book. I decided to challenge myself to create something new from scratch. So the first step was general research on how to write stories, what kind of writing exercises help with world building, plot setting, watching many interviews of New York Times best-selling authors, and about their journey and writing process, which was also very inspiring. I didn't limit myself to just book or novel writers. I watched videos on screenwriting and playwriting as well, just to get one big general idea of how the writing world works and what pathways can come from becoming a writer. From this research, I learned about helpful steps such as having a designating writing space or sectioning the book into smaller pieces, that way you don't burn out easily. I learned a lot about setting and character development. After all that research on solely writing, I wanted to know more about the publishing world and what happens after you've written a book. I ended up taking a master class, which was 2.5 hours long. And I learned about the differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. The main difference is that in self-publishing, you have to pay to have your work published and to manage things such as editing, marketing, production, whereas in traditional publishing, you need to submit your work to a publishing company, and if that goes right, then they mostly handle everything else, especially rights and royalties. And that was the beginning. Next was coming up with an original storyline and characters. As someone who reads quite a lot, I have ideas about character personalities and character traits that I could see myself writing about. I had a general idea of who the protagonist of the story would be, and since I wanted to write a story taking place during World War II in Poland, the antagonists were evidently the Nazis and the Soviet Union. I wanted to tell a story about Romani people and culture, as I've never seen or read anything about Romani people. As someone who was born and raised in Canada, I haven't really learned much about countries from Central Europe and onwards in depth. So I decided to educate myself on the topic and challenge myself to write something foreign to me. I also wanted to highlight the lifestyle of targeted minorities and other prejudice characters faced during the war, as well as societal standards, because a lot are still relevant today, and I wanted to bring attention to that in my story. Once I had my developed ideas with characters and plot figured out, I started my research journey. I started researching a whole bunch about Poland and Polish culture so that I can integrate it into my story. After was a bunch of research on how Poland was affected during the war, and that's how I got the inspiration to write about the two cities of Warsaw and Białystok. I actually learned a lot from Jewish activism accounts on Instagram as well. At Elo Steph's Instagram post about her grandmother Rose surviving the Treblinka death camp, and her grandma's sister whose husband led the World War II resistance movement, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, was very inspiring, and I was inspired by more of her stories she shared on her page and decided to incorporate true aspects from her posts into my story. And finally, after everything was set and ready, I started writing, which was actually quite enjoyable at times since all the tedious work was already done. Of course, there were days where I had writer's block or I had to step away from writing to complete other things, but what I strived for was at least 1,000 words a day, give or take. I also got some great feedback and writing tips from my mentor that helped a lot, and that was pretty much it for the process. I did end up publishing my story just on online platforms. I didn't end up publishing it on Amazon or anything because it was more about the gathering of information, process, more so than publishing. It was definitely more for the experience and knowledge. And that's it. Thanks for listening.